The cowboy refused money and chose honor instead. Dustwood was the kind of town where nothing changed quickly. The roads were dusty, the buildings were old, and the wind always seemed to carry the same dry sound across the wooden houses. People woke up early, worked hard, and slept early. Most of them believed that peace was not something to be found. It was something to be protected by staying out of trouble. Because of this, strangers were noticed immediately. One evening, just before the sun began to disappear behind the hills, a lone cowboy entered Dustwood. He rode in slowly, not rushing his horse, as if he had nowhere urgent to be. His clothes were simple and worn from long travel. His hat shaded most of his face, but what people could see was enough to make them curious. He looked calm, but there was something serious in his silence. He stopped near the edge of town, looked around once, and then continued forward. No one came to greet him. In Dustwood, people did not easily trust outsiders. They watched him from windows, doorways, and behind curtains. Some children pointed at him quietly, but their parents quickly pulled them back inside. The cowboy did not seem bothered. He just moved through the town like he was reading a story only he could understand. He tied his horse outside a small general store and stepped down without hurry. The wooden boards under his boots creaked slightly, but he paid no attention. The town had a saloon, a bakery, and a small inn, yet he chose none of them immediately. Instead, he stood in the middle of the street for a moment, looking at the horizon as the sky turned orange. His name, people would later learn, was Caleb Ward. But at that moment, he was just a stranger. Inside the saloon, conversations slowed as he walked in. Men sitting around tables stopped talking mid-sentence. The bartender looked up carefully, polishing a glass that suddenly didn't need polishing. Caleb did not act like someone trying to impress or scare anyone. He simply found a quiet corner and sat down. He ordered water instead of whiskey. That small choice made a few people exchange glances. In towns like Dustwood, people often judged strangers by small habits first. But Caleb didn't seem interested in fitting in or standing out. He just observed everything quietly. The doors, the exits, the people, the way the room carried sound. Outside, the sun finally disappeared, leaving the town under soft lantern light. That was when a different kind of attention entered Dustwood. A well-dressed rider arrived on a strong black horse. Unlike Caleb, this man did not try to go unnoticed. He stopped right in front of the saloon, stepped down slowly, and adjusted his coat like someone used to being important. His boots were clean, and his presence made people shift uncomfortably. He carried himself like someone who was not used to hearing no. He walked into the saloon and spoke with confidence. He asked for the town leader, but in Dustwood, leadership was not formal. It was more of a quiet agreement among a few respected men. They gathered quickly once they realized who had arrived. The man introduced himself as a messenger for Victor Hale, a powerful land baron known across nearby regions. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. He said Mr. Hale was looking for assistance with an important matter, something involving land near Dustwood that had become complicated. The messenger did not explain everything. He did not need to. Instead, he placed a small pouch on the table. The sound of coins inside was enough to change the mood in the room. It was not a small amount. Even from a distance, people could tell it was more money than most of them had seen at once. He said there would be more, much more, for the right person willing to help. Silence followed. Some men leaned forward slightly. Others looked away, pretending not to be interested. In Dustwood, money did not come easily, and opportunity was rare. But so was trust. Caleb, sitting quietly in the corner, watched without moving. The messenger's eyes slowly scanned the room, as if choosing someone. When his gaze landed on Caleb, he paused. Something about the calm stranger seemed different from the rest. Not eager, not afraid, just steady. He walked over and placed the pouch in front of Caleb's table. "This could be yours," he said simply. "No questions asked, just cooperation." All eyes turned toward Caleb. The room felt smaller suddenly. Even the sound of the wind outside seemed quieter. People expected him to reach for the money. After all, he was new in town. No one knew his past. No one would judge him here. But Caleb did not move immediately. He looked at the pouch for a moment, then at the messenger, and finally at the room full of watching faces. Something was about to change in Dustwood, and everyone could feel it. The saloon in Dustwood was unusually quiet that night. Even the usual background noise of laughter, card games, and glasses hitting the wooden tables had faded. All attention was fixed on the stranger sitting in the corner. Caleb Ward still sat calmly. The pouch of coins was right in front of him, placed carefully by the messenger of Victor Hale. It looked heavy, not only in weight but in meaning. Everyone in the room understood what it represented: security, power, and a chance to escape poverty. The messenger stood tall, waiting for an answer. He did not seem nervous. Men like him were used to silence before decisions. He believed money usually ended silence quickly. But Caleb did not rush. He leaned slightly forward, studying the pouch as if it was not just gold but something deeper. Then he looked up at the messenger. "What is the work?" Caleb asked in a calm voice. The messenger gave a small smile, as if he expected this question. He slowly took a step closer so everyone could hear clearly. "There is a piece of land outside Dustwood," he said. "It belongs to people who refuse to leave. Mr. Hale has bought the rights, but they do not accept it. They are delaying progress. Your job would be to help remove that delay." He spoke carefully, avoiding harsh words, but the meaning was clear enough. It was not just business, it was pressure wrapped in money. The room stayed silent again. Some men shifted in their seats. Others stared at the floor. Everyone understood what "remove the delay" truly meant, even if it was not said directly. The messenger continued. "It will be quick work, no complications, and you will be rewarded very well. This amount here is only the beginning." He tapped the pouch lightly, making the coins inside clink together. Dustwood had always been a place where people struggled to survive. The idea of easy wealth was powerful. A few men in the room exchanged glances, silently imagining what they could do with such money. A better house, a new start, a life without struggle. But Caleb's expression did not change. He finally reached out, but not to take the pouch. Instead, he gently pushed it back across the table. The movement was small, but it changed everything in the room. The messenger's smile faded slightly. "You misunderstand," he said. "This is only a simple job. Many men would accept it without hesitation." Caleb shook his head slowly. "I understand clearly," he replied. He paused for a moment, then continued in the same calm voice. "But I don't take work that forces others out of their home." The words were simple. No anger, no insult, just a clear decision. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. A man near the bar whispered something under his breath, but no one responded. Even the bartender stopped wiping glasses. Everyone was now watching not just the messenger, but Caleb. The messenger's eyes narrowed slightly. He was not used to refusal, especially not in front of others. "You are turning down a large amount of money," he said. "People do not often get a second chance like this." Caleb adjusted his hat slightly, still calm. "I don't need a second chance for something like this," he said. The messenger stood still for a moment, as if trying to understand him. Then he slowly reached for the pouch and pulled it back toward himself. For a brief second, it looked like tension might rise, but Caleb did not move. He was not threatening, he was simply firm. The messenger finally spoke again, this time with a colder tone. "You are new here, Cowboy. You do not understand how things work in this region." Caleb looked at him directly. "Maybe I don't," he said, "but I understand people should not lose their homes because someone has more money." Those words spread through the room like a quiet wave. Some men looked uncomfortable. Others looked surprised. A few looked thoughtful, as if they had never heard someone speak so directly without fear. The messenger exhaled slowly. He realized this was not a man who could be easily persuaded. Not with money, not with pressure. He placed the pouch fully back into his coat. "Mr. Hale will hear about this," he said. Caleb gave a small nod. "I expect he will," he replied. The messenger turned and walked out of the saloon without another word. The sound of his boots faded into the night outside, but the silence he left behind stayed. Slowly, people in the saloon began to whisper again. Some were impressed. Some were confused. Some were worried about what would happen next. Because in Dustwood, refusing Victor Hale was not a small thing. It was a decision that often brought consequences. Caleb remained seated for a while longer. He did not celebrate his choice. He did not look worried either. He simply finished his water and stood up. As he walked out of the saloon, the townspeople watched him differently now. He was no longer just a stranger passing through. He was a man who had said no to power. And in Dustwood, that was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The next morning in Dustwood felt different. The sun rose as usual, casting warm light over the dusty streets, but the town itself felt heavier. People moved slower, spoke softer, and looked around more often than they normally did. News traveled fast in small towns, and by sunrise everyone already knew what had happened at the saloon the night before. A stranger had refused Victor Hale's money. That was not something people forgot easily. Caleb Ward stood outside the small inn where he had stayed for the night. He was adjusting his gear quietly, preparing for another day that had no clear direction. He did not look like a man who had caused tension in a town. He looked like someone who simply wanted to continue his journey. But Dustwood was no longer just watching him. It was waiting. Across the street, two men sat on wooden crates, pretending to talk while clearly watching him. At the bakery, a woman paused while handing bread to a customer, her eyes briefly shifting toward Caleb. Even children playing nearby were told to stay closer to home. The town was unsettled, though no one said it directly. Caleb noticed everything. He always did. Still, he did not react. He finished tightening the strap on his horse and stood quietly for a moment, looking down the long road that led out of Dustwood. For most travelers, that road meant freedom. For Caleb, it seemed like a choice that was not yet available. Before he could mount his horse, footsteps approached. Three men from the town council, respected but clearly nervous, walked toward him. They were not aggressive, but their faces showed concern. They stopped a few steps away, unsure how to begin. Finally, one of them spoke. "Word has spread," he said carefully. "About last night." Caleb nodded once. "I expected it would." Another man cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale does not take refusal lightly." There it was, the truth everyone was avoiding saying directly. Caleb looked at them calmly. "I did not refuse him to make enemies," he said. "I refused because it was not right." The men exchanged glances. They were not used to answers like that. In Dustwood, most decisions were based on survival, not principles. The first man spoke again. "We are not here to argue with you. We just want you to understand the situation. Hale has influence. A lot of it. People who stand against him usually face pressure. Sometimes quietly, sometimes not." Caleb listened without interrupting. Then he replied, "I understand." A long silence followed. The men seemed unsure what to do next. They had expected fear, or at least hesitation. But Caleb showed neither. That made him harder to deal with. Finally, the third man spoke more honestly. "Some people in town think you brought trouble here." Caleb turned slightly toward him. "And others?" The man hesitated. "Others think maybe someone finally said what they were afraid to say." That answer lingered in the air. Caleb did not respond immediately. He looked at the street, at the buildings, at the people quietly watching from a distance. Dustwood was not a loud town, but it was a town full of unspoken thoughts. "I am not here to bring trouble," Caleb said at last, "and I am not here to lead anyone. I am just passing through." The first man sighed. "Sometimes passing through is enough to change things." Caleb did not argue with that. Just then, a rider appeared at the far end of the street. He was moving slowly, but with purpose. As he came closer, people recognized him. It was another messenger from Victor Hale. The town grew even quieter. The rider stopped near the center of the street and looked around before focusing on Caleb. He did not get down from his horse. Instead, he called out loudly, "Caleb Ward!" Everyone froze at the sound of his name. The messenger continued, "You have been asked again. Mr. Hale is willing to increase the reward, double what was offered. He says this is your final chance to make the right decision." The words echoed through the street. Now even those who had doubted before were paying full attention. Double the money was not something easily ignored. The messenger reached into his bag and held up another pouch. It looked heavier than the first one. "Take it," he said, "and avoid unnecessary problems." All eyes turned to Caleb. This was the moment that would define him in the eyes of the town. Caleb stood still for a few seconds. The street was silent except for the soft sound of wind moving through wooden signs. Even his horse did not move. Then he stepped forward slightly, but not toward the money, toward the messenger. And in that quiet moment, Dustwood realized that Caleb Ward was not going to be influenced by pressure, fear, or wealth. He was going to choose something else entirely, something harder to explain, something called honor. The afternoon sun in Dustwood was no longer soft. It was sharp, golden, and heavy, as if the sky itself was watching what would happen next. The entire town felt quiet in a way that was not peaceful but tense. People stayed near windows and doors. No one wanted to miss what was about to unfold. Caleb Ward stood in the middle of the main street. The second messenger from Victor Hale was still mounted on his horse, holding the pouch of money in the air like it was something powerful enough to change minds instantly. Around them, townspeople gathered at a distance. Some stood behind walls, others near wagons, but all eyes were focused on the same point. Caleb did not look at the money for long. He looked at the messenger. Then he spoke calmly. "Take it back." The messenger frowned. "You are making a mistake. This is more money than most men see in their lifetime." Caleb shook his head slightly. "Money does not decide everything." A low murmur moved through the crowd. People were hearing words they were not used to hearing in Dustwood. Most decisions here were made because of fear or need, but Caleb spoke like those things did not control him. The messenger lowered the pouch slightly. "Mr. Hale is not a patient man. If you refuse again, there will be consequences." Caleb replied without raising his voice. "I am not refusing out of anger. I am refusing because it is wrong." The word wrong stayed in the air for a moment. Then Caleb turned slightly, facing the gathered townspeople as well. "This town does not belong to money," he said, "and it does not belong to pressure. It belongs to the people who live here." Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others lowered their eyes. A few nodded slowly as if they had been waiting a long time to hear something like that. The messenger looked irritated now. He pulled the pouch back and signaled to the rider beside him. It looked like he might say more, but at that exact moment, another sound interrupted him. Hoofbeats. From the far end of the street, a group of riders appeared. Dust rose behind them as they approached slowly but confidently. The crowd stepped back slightly as they came closer. Victor Hale had arrived. He was not dressed like a worker or a traveler. He wore a clean, dark coat and sat tall on his horse. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. When he reached the center of the street, his group stopped behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Victor Hale looked directly at Caleb. "So," he said in a steady voice, "you are the man who refuses easy fortune." Caleb did not respond immediately. He studied the man in front of him. Then he replied, "I refuse what is not right." A faint smile appeared on Hale's face. Right and wrong are words people use when they cannot afford choices. The crowd stayed silent. This was no longer just a conversation between two men. It felt like something larger, something that involved the whole town. Victor Hale slowly dismounted. He walked a few steps forward and gestured toward the land outside town. "That land is mine by law," he said. "I paid for it. I own it. The people there are delaying progress. I am offering them fair payment." Caleb answered calmly. "And if they do not want to leave?" Hale's expression tightened slightly. "Then they will need help understanding." A cold silence followed. Caleb stepped forward once, not aggressively, just enough to make his position clear. "People are not obstacles," he said. "They are not things to be moved." Hale looked at him for a long moment, then he spoke more quietly. "You are standing alone, Cowboy. Dustwood is small. I am not." Caleb replied, "Even small places deserve respect." Those words reached the crowd deeply. Some people looked at each other. Others looked at the ground. Something was changing in them. For the first time, a few of them stepped slightly closer to Caleb, not because they were brave, but because they were tired of staying silent. Victor Hale noticed this shift. His eyes narrowed slightly. He realized this situation was no longer only about land. It had become about influence, and he was beginning to lose it. After a long pause, he exhaled slowly. "You are a difficult man," Hale said. Caleb answered simply, "I am just honest." The wind moved through the street again, softer now. Hale looked at his men, then back at Caleb. For a moment, it seemed like tension might rise again. But instead, he did something unexpected. He turned away slightly. Then he said, "We will settle this another way." He mounted his horse again. His men followed. But before leaving, Hale looked one last time at Caleb. "This is not over," he said. Caleb nodded once. "I know." And then, just like that, Victor Hale and his riders turned and left Dustwood. The street remained silent even after they disappeared into the distance. No one moved at first, as if unsure whether it was truly over. Then slowly, people began to step out from their hiding places. They looked around, as if seeing their town differently. Caleb stood alone in the center for a moment longer. He had no money, no reward, no promise of safety. But Dustwood was still standing. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like it belonged to the people again. Caleb turned toward his horse. It was time to leave. But as he rode out of Dustwood, something followed him. Not gold, not fear, but respect. And the town never forgot the cowboy who refused money and chose honor instead.